Hello and welcome to another edition of All About Apps by the Clever Road Studio. Today's topic is about the differences between iOS and Android app development. In fact, we've identified 9 of them. So let's not waste time and find out what they are. Difference number 1, coding. You may have heard about Java and Objective-C. I mention them because these two languages are used to create applications on your device. The first one is associated with Android programming and the second one is associated with iOS apps. A few years ago, one could have said that Java was much easier to learn and apply than the old, more difficult Objective-C. You need to write nearly twice as much code to get the same result, but some developers consider it a much cleaner language. In fact, there is another language which is involved in creating iOS apps, and this has recently become open sourced. It's called Swift. This guy is almost on a par with Java when it comes to ease of learning and deployment. As knowing Java could open the doors to development for operating systems such as Windows and Linux, today with Swift becoming more open sourced and supporting Linux tools, it's possible to widen your opportunities as a developer. Maybe one day we will see Swift as a means of programming for Android. Difference number 2, integrated development environment. What is IDE? I'm sure you've heard of Visual Basic, Microsoft Visual Studio, Delphi, NetBeans, etc. These are all IDEs. In plain language, IDE is a place where you can apply programming language knowledge and start creating. There are 2 development tools suggested by Google and Apple nowadays. They are the relatively new Android Studio and the latest version of Xcode. Previously, Android application development was carried out with Eclipse IDE using an Android development toolkit, but the company decided to replace it with Studio because it's more convenient. Although Google has switched to a more efficient environment, Android Studio is thought to be the least mature mobile app development tool among IDEs. According to Strategy Analytics, Android Studio is lacking in 5 areas. These are languages, platforms, testing, editor and gaming. It's got a rating score of only 13, whereas Xcode got 22. Difference number 3, operating systems. If you're new to IT or just missed something, then you need to know that a developer who aspires to building iOS apps must have a computer that runs a Mac OS, and only a Mac. Whereas you can develop Android applications on Windows, Mac and Linux. I guess it's no secret that Mac OS is more expensive than Windows, and thank God there are still a few programmers in the world who can get any Linux OS for nothing, which, let's agree, is more attractive for a self-employed developer. Difference number 4, design. Here I've picked up on the major differences between iOS and Android app development in terms of design, because it's a tricky topic for discussion. Number 1, general style. Natural and soft for Android apps, plain and minimalistic for iOS apps. Number 2, back function. There is a real button on most devices, but as a developer, you need to implement the back chevron in the top left corner of the screen for iOS applications, since Apple's devices don't have this feature. Number 3, title. The title in an Android application is normally placed in the top left corner of the screen, whereas iOS app titles need to be centered. Number 4, navigation. This is thought to be the biggest difference between Android and iOS. Android uses a draw menu as a navigation pattern, whereas iOS uses a tab bar. The first one can be very obstructive as it appears as a paper sheet occupying a lot of space on the display. Number 5, button style. In general, what is associated with Android material design are drop shadows and uppercase letters. iOS requires all the applications developed for the platform to be simple in style, thus their buttons don't have drop shadows and all the captions are just capitalized. Number 6, icon style. In short, Android icons have thick strokes, whereas iOS icons are much thinner. Difference number 5, entrance fees. The Google Play Store requires a $25 fee to be registered as a developer, but Apple wants more. So for your applications to see the light of day, you need to pay as much as $99. Difference number 6, app review. Google isn't as strict as Apple. It usually takes a day or two for your application to pass the examination. So you can enjoy seeing your masterpiece in the Google Play Store the day after you've submitted it. Apple App Store is more severe in this respect. They can test and examine your brainchild for up to 3 weeks. The whole thing about this is that if your application successfully passes the examination, it will be almost perfect. Difference number 7, distribution platforms. How does an Android developer benefit? By getting feedback from users, you can update your application every 2 hours, whilst iOS users have to wait 2 weeks for developers to fix problems. At this stage, we need to remember what I said earlier. Thanks to Apple's strict and pitiless rules, it's very unlikely that an application developed to the Apple Store will be riddled with bugs. So Google Play Store is as flexible as its review process. Difference number 8, market share. According to the International Data Corporation, Android dominates the market with an 82.8% share, while Apple only has a market share of 13.9%. Difference number 9, profitability. Despite the fact that Android wins in terms of sales, that doesn't mean that companies will make a huge profit out of Android OS users. Let me explain. Google has been making strong inroads into new markets like Indonesia, Vietnam and India, while Apple has been doing likewise in China. That means that the Asian app market is having a big effect on both Apple Store and Google Play. Taking into account that these countries are described as developing ones, except for China, it is obvious that users aren't going to spend a lot of money on apps. App Annie, an analytic company, reported that Google should concentrate on the old, more affluent markets like the USA and Europe because they contribute more to the company's revenue. Well, it seems that our story has drawn to a close. If you have found this topic interesting, you're welcome to read the full article on our site. At the same time, don't forget to subscribe to receive our channel's latest updates. See you next time. Bye for now.